Welcome back to Chatting with Kody, and I'm Kody with a K. In this episode, we'll be talking about Dungeons & Dragons from the aspect of a dungeon master as opposed to the last episode where it was more player-focused. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for over 20 years. I started out as a player as everyone does, but my older sibling, who was normally the dungeon master, was rather unreliable. So I would play with friends, take my parents' Yahtzee dice, and play D&D as I enjoyed providing the experience that my friends would play out. Now, between the role-playing and combat, I find most of the groups that I've had the pleasure of playing with, they seem to like the combat aspect more of the game. As combat would play out, at the end of each turn, I'd always try and describe the actions with fervor as it would elevate the turn of each player. Simply stating that the first attack missed while the second attack hit and had done damage would be easier and quicker for the flow of combat, but I find that adding descriptions to the actions just adds a little bit more flavor to the combat. Stating that the first sword barely missed its mark with the second sword in their offhand makes contact with the enemy's flesh, spraying blood as they recoil in pain, or when a player casts Chilled Touch, an icy hand emerges forth from their own and glides across the battlefield while the mist falls off the hand. When it finally reaches the target, the icy hand grasps at the enemy, inflicting several points of damage. And with that, painting a small picture in the mind of players at the end of each turn makes the combat memorable. Maybe it's because most of the people that I do game with are fans of some type of shonen anime, so they get to insert their character into a scene that they've concocted in their head resembling a scene from their favorite shonen dealing that fatal blow to the enemy. Even though I've played Dungeons & Dragons for quite some time, I don't commit the rules to memory unless it's something that comes up frequently in the game. Even as a DM, I treat it as a game, and not a university-level course in word lawyering with rules memorized to heart. As much as the D&D rules are important, I find that providing an enjoyable experience to the player is also important. One of the few rules that I do enforce is having a minimum of at least 3 players in a session, as it provides a balance to the game. I find that having only 2 players in the game, one player pretty much becomes a tag-along, as generally the other player is more experienced. Adding a third breaks that tag-along mindset of the players and adds a dichotomy of actions to the equation. A bad idea can sound good between 2 people, but if you add a third person, the bad idea might get pointed out. Or if the third is convinced, maybe it isn't a bad idea at all. One of the things I also enjoy about having 3 players is that it helps weave a story for the campaign, using their own backstories to create something. Allowing each player to create their own backstory, whether it be a young half-orc looking for his glorious purpose in life, an elf that was abandoned by their father after a city-destroying attack, going out looking for him, or a retired aspect of death being dragged back into the fray years after leaving that life behind. It allows for creativity to flow, and weaving a singular story from it, making the players feel more in tune with what's happening in roleplay and in battle, as it makes that failed check all the more dire, or that taste of victory so much sweeter. But with adding more players, it's a bit more difficult to create a story from so many backgrounds and character types, so I generally do impose some restrictions like having a character with a soldier-based background or a generic race like human, elf, or dwarf, so that it can be integrated easier into the storyline, allowing it to flow more naturally as opposed to having the entire campaign shift to allow for extra characters to be introduced. I think that's enough rambling for tonight, though. I just want to thank you for sitting with me and letting me go on about this topic a little longer. Maybe we'll schedule another session sometime soon. Before I go, I have to ask, did you ever think of becoming a dungeon master? If you do, let me know. Maybe I can be a human fighter in the group.